Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio. I'm Tim Grady. I'm here with my co-host, Lou Weiss, and we are going to be speaking with Dr. Chris Kuehl of Armada Corporate Intelligence. Chris has joined us on many shows, and he happens to do a lot of work in the association industry to help them understand what's going on. One is with the National Association of Credit Managers. Chris prepares and puts out their report each month on how the credit managers are feeling. And Lou, we're going to find out if the credit managers are up or down this month.
Well, we got a bit of a clue, so we're going to let Chris humorously lay upon us the numbers.
Very good. When you're counting on an economist talking about credit managers for humor, you have been inside way too long, and it's time to get back out in the world. Yeah, it's true. I do a lot of work for the National Association for Credit Management, and a couple of things to kind of to preface talking about the actual index. Credit managers have a tendency to think into the future. When you think about what they do for a living, they're the people who are deciding whether you're going to get credit to buy the machine or buy the inventory or buy whatever it is you want to buy from the company they work for. So they're deciding what kind of terms to offer you. Are you going to get 90-day terms, 120-day terms? Do they not trust you at all and they want cash on delivery? It's just a matter of negotiating when it is you're going to pay. So as they are making these decisions, they're looking out ahead. They don't really care how you're doing today because they're looking at it from the perspective of, well, you might have 90 to 120, 180 days to mess things up. How are you going to look when you owe me? And so by its very nature, the index is looking out 6 months in advance, sometimes maybe even further than that, which is why it has become something of a forecast tool. Those of you who've watched this presentation before or listened over the years, you know all about the Purchasing Managers Index. The PMI was the inspiration for the CMI. A bunch of credit managers were sitting together at a bar and said to themselves, how come purchasing managers are famous and we're not? Well, they have an index. Well, why don't we have an index? We can do that. So we do, which looks exactly like the Purchasing Managers Index. Same diffusion index, same anything over 50 is good, anything under 50 is bad. And we have the same basic format. You know that the Purchasing Managers Index is asking, did you buy more? Did you buy less? Did you buy the same? With the Credit Managers Index, we're asking very similar types of questions. We divide it into favorables and unfavorables. The favorables will be things like sales, applications for credit, amount of credit extended, dollar collections. So we're asking, are you seeing more or less dollar collections? And we get an idea what's happening from there. The unfavorables will include things like accounts out for collection, bankruptcies, slow pays, rejections of credit applications, disputes. And so you ask a credit manager, are you seeing more or fewer credits for collection? More. Well, how come? They're not paying us. You do know how this works, don't you? So I don't know why they're not paying us. Maybe they're jerks. Maybe we're jerks. I don't know. They're just not paying us. And if they keep it up, I'm putting them into collections. That's what I do for a living. So it gives us this great month-to-month indication of where things are. And so now I can get to what the latest index says, which is we're still doing very well. The numbers came down just a little on the favorable side, but they had been exceptionally high in January. We had numbers that were in the upper 60s, even 70s for the sales category. They are still in the 60s, and a couple of them, I think, went into the high 50s. So they're still very strong, not as strong as they were in January. I think we began to see a little bit of the impact of extended lockdowns and things of that nature. But the unfavorables all stayed about where they were. And these are now all up in the 50s. We don't have any category at all in the sub 50 category. So even in the negatives, we're not seeing any signs of distress. Granted, it's close. I mean, the numbers are 51, 52, 53 something, so they're not robustly into the 50s, but if you go back to April, May, March of last year, the numbers were in the 20s and 30s. That was really, really bad. And now we are back into respectable territory. And again, this is looking ahead. So these guys are saying, we're pretty confident going all the way up until the summer. And that's a good place to be. So how about that for a very long response to a very simple question?
Well, here's the speed bump and rabbit hole question of the show. All right. I know, and you know, that there are two different views of our economy.
Right.
Okay. And
Just
there are those who say things are wonderful. Billionaires are becoming trillionaires. Manufacturing companies are coming out with high profit numbers. And then you hear on the other brands of television, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, that things are terrible. The economy is terrible. I heard last night the press secretary speaking about we have to bring this economy back. Well, and then I listened to PMI, your report, MAPI, IHS, and the like, and everybody, no, it's wonderful, it's great. So
well,
explain that to me.
yeah, well, that's very easy to explain because when you're dealing with the economy, it's like anything else. Depends. I mean, you've got particularly in this recession, a very odd split because there was nothing about this recession that was organic. If you go back to 2008, we knew what the issue was and we could see it coming. I mean, the credit managers began to anticipate 2008's recession as early as 2007. You know, our numbers were reflecting it already because that was a financial sector meltdown. We knew what was happening. This one, it's like January, February, okay, we're great. We're going to grow at 3%, la, 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 la. Bam. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. Close. What? Close right now. Shut down. Don't let anybody in. Close. Everybody go home. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Don't see anyone. Don't even talk to your family. Don't do anything. Just sit there. There's a disease. Stop it.
You can do a podcast.
Yeah, and exactly, but only if you sprayed your laptop with Lysol, and then you're good to go. So it was an imposed recession, and it really slammed the service sector. So if you look at even our data, the manufacturing side has been strong for months. Service is still weak. Our index is pretty heavy on retail. It doesn't really do a lot with some of the more like food service and tourism and the like. The majority of our members who are on the service side are in retail. Retail started to recover last year, but it's still a lot further behind than manufacturers. So when you get people talking about the economy, you almost have to sit there and say, look, are you talking about people that make RVs? Well, okay, the RV business is absolutely on fire. I mean, the second one of those things hits the lot, there's 37 people beating each other up for the honor to buy it. On the other hand, I was talking to a group yesterday that involves lodging in Hawaii. The occupancy rate for the Waikiki Sheraton is 1.1%. This last weekend, they had 5 guests for a 950 room hotel. So if you ask them, how's your economy? Sucks. There's a company that sets up trade shows. It had 3,500 employees. It now has 1. So it just depends on where you are. If you're in the right sector at the right time, you make a lot of money, and that's always been the rub. That's why it's fun to be an economist, because it's like being a weatherman. You can sit there and say, well, there was weather today.
Or you can be,
and get
or
paid.
you can predict the weather and be wrong every day and still have your
Absolutely.
150
Absolutely. You know,
dollars.
it's just, it is, that's why we are kindred spirits, us and meteorologists. You know, we have lots and lots of data. And at the end of the day, we have to step outside and go, is it raining? So it's the age-old definition of recessions and depressions. It's a downturn if your neighbor loses their job. It's a recession if you lose your job. It's a depression if the economist loses their job.
Right.
So, Chris, with all of that cheery news, what do we look like in terms of an economy, barring the next shutdown, the next wave? They're now talking about 3 waves of COVID.
Right.
What does the GDP look like for 2021? I'm assuming it's kind of okay, tepid.
Yeah, it's actually pretty good. I mean, it depends again on who you ask and what they're studying, but the large banks, for example, are all looking at somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5% growth, and they're probably the most optimistic. That's like Citi and JP Morgan and the like. The big institutions like IMF and OECD and the Congressional Budget Office, they're all talking about 4.5, maybe 5% growth. That is all much higher than we traditionally have been. Our 25-year average is about 2.5% growth. So we are still seeing the rebound from 2020. I mean, last year, we had the disastrous second quarter where we were down almost 40 points. And then third quarter, we were up 35. And so it's kind of like, wow, that hurt. And we came back, but still not quite to where we had been. So now we're kind of getting back to those numbers. And right now there's new issues because one of the concerns that we did not have last year was inflation. And now all of a sudden we're worrying about inflation. And it was only November or so of last year where inflation didn't even show up as a concern. Today, it's more of a concern than COVID-19 if you look at businesses in the financial sector. And it's partly because of that question of whether is the economy doing well or not. We're looking at $1.9 trillion rescue, bailout, stimulus, however you want to look at it. Is it coming at the wrong time? Are we going to shove a bunch of money into the economy at the same time that we start to grow? And if we do, then we may overheat. And overheating means inflation. And you start to see the money supply push inflation. That in and of itself is not a huge problem. The problem would be if the Fed and other institutions decide to control that inflation and start raising interest rates and start reducing their bond purchases and all the easy money thing. Now, the Fed has been as insistent as it can be this week. Every single Fed official is saying, we are not raising interest rates. Go home, shut up, leave us alone. We're not going to do that. But we all have been down that road. It's kind of like the college football coach that the athletic director says, great guy, we're not going to fire him, we're not going to fire him. 20 minutes later, he's fired. It's kind of like, they will change. And as recently as August, all the central banks were saying, we're not going to raise rates, but there's already been a defection. And it would be from the Germans, as one would expect. The Germans obsess about inflation 24/7, 365. The head of the Bundesbank, Jens Wiedemann, said about a week ago, I am worried about inflation. Why? Because I am German. And we may decide to push rates anyway. And it's like, would you calm down? No, I am German. And inflation worries me always. So we have one bank now that's talking about it. The rest of them aren't, but you can see the logic. And you've got people like Larry Summers, who is Clinton's Treasury Secretary, saying, I'm worried about overheating. So it's not an unknown concern. We'll just have to watch it.
as a manufacturer at All Metals and Forge Group, I can handle a little bit more overheating.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
and a
so,
lot of companies can.
yeah, I can handle a good 20-30% overheating and then stop. Let's not talk about stopping before it starts.
Yeah, exactly. And the challenge, and this is why inflation is so maddening. Inflation sets up money chasing, because what happens when you see the money supply increase is that consumers have more money, therefore they can spend more. The producer then says, well, consumers have more money. So I've been waiting to be able to raise my prices for over a year. My costs have gone up, so I'm going to raise my prices a little bit. And then the consumer goes, well, you've raised your prices. I need a wage increase. And the producer goes, I'm going to have to raise my prices again because those people wanted a wage increase. And it's like, well, you raised your prices. I want another wage increase. Well, look, these people got a wage increase. I didn't. And you just have this stacking where it's hard to find a way to stop it. And when you do control inflation, it is slow. I mean, it's not like the Fed's going to raise rates and instantly we all react. It takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months before that action has an impact. And so the Fed tends to act way in advance. It's more or less today saying, where will inflation be in 2022? Should we do something about it now or should we wait a while? And the other things that drive inflation, one of them isn't doing anything at all, and that's wages. We haven't had wage inflation for years and won't now either. We didn't have it when there was 3.5% unemployment. We are seeing it on the commodity side, and that's the only place where it's really clearly showing up. Metal prices are up, steel prices are up, lumber prices are ridiculous right now. Oil hasn't changed much. It's up into the 60s barely, but it's probably going to drop back down. The demand isn't really driving it. We're not running into big production issues. We should. I mean, 15 years ago, if you had the geopolitics you have today, people would be panicking and they'd be looking at $140 a barrel oil. Civil war in Libya, Iraq is in trouble, Iran's in trouble, etc. Now people are like, so is North Dakota still part of the US? Yeah. Any chance of a civil war between the North and South Dakotans? No. Is Canada going to invade? No. Then I don't care what's happening in the Middle East. You know, we're producing our own oil, you know, so it's not as big an issue. Until oil prices start to move, we're probably not going to get a lot of commodity pressure. But if you're in the housing sector, you're already feeling it. The lumber prices have added to the cost of a home and will continue to. And so those are all the little weird factors that could change the equation. And some of them can change quickly. I mean, the reason lumber is expensive, part of the reason is we have tariffs on Canadian lumber. If we decided to remove those, bingo, lumber is cheaper.
Chris, I'm wondering about the consumer because as a consumer, and I go fill up my car, I notice gas prices at the pump are up 30% from where they were back in January. They're rising rather rapidly. That tends to, at some point, take a bite out of my budget, and so I get kind of spooky. And when do I pull back? Is the consumer getting nervous?
The consumer's getting a little bit nervous, but there's kind of price points in the per gallon price that trigger behavior. And what we've noticed over the years is that as long as it's in the $2 range, people don't change their habits much. When it hits $3, then they start to get worried. And at first, there's going to be a very minor reaction because frankly, most of us cannot change what we do as far as our driving habits. You know, we're driving to commute. And if the price per gallon goes up, we're not going to say, by God, gas is $3.10. I'm quitting. I am never going to drive to work again. By God, I'm done. You know, it's like, well, no, you're going to continue to drive. But you start thinking about the next car you buy. And you're thinking, well, if it's going to stay high, maybe I'm not going to buy the super Hummer that has its own 50 cal mounted on the top. Much as I want one of those for commuting purposes, it would certainly clear out the traffic. Now you start thinking, well, maybe I do need a Prius. You know, I mean, I'm from Kansas, and the small car phenomenon never did really take root here. People were sort of looking at the Prius like, well, I may get one to put it in the back of the pickup truck as a spare. So, you know, if I need it, I can just roll her out and drive away. But for the rest of the country, it's kind of waiting for that price point. A lot of what's driven oil prices up lately has just been winter weather. I mean, we saw a 20-cent jump just because of the big freeze, and it shut down refineries. Texas is not used to 10 below. I mean, as far as they were concerned, this was a catastrophe of biblical proportion. You know, it's just like, for them, a cold snap was 50. And it was like, I had to laugh at one point. Dallas was colder than Novosibirsk in Siberia. So.
Incredible.
But there's no such thing as climate change.
No, none. It doesn't exist. You know, I mean, it's just, it's as we all know, it's entirely the fault of forest gnomes. So.
I always like to remind people on climate change that 40,000 years ago in Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, there was an ice sheet a mile thick. Not 40 million years ago, 40,000. Yeah. So you really need to worry about the coming ice age. Because when it's too much water in the atmosphere, it starts to snow uncontrollably, and we're going down the other side of the slope.
That's what's always been a crack up to me, is that, you know, people arguing of it is like climate change is permanent. I mean, does it ever occur to you that the oil comes from plants that have rotted and decayed? And why do we get so much oil from the Middle East? You see any plants there right now? You know, at some point they must have had some. You know, it's kind of like, look. So it's yeah. I live in what used to be an inland sea. You know, it always surprises people when they find, you know, dinosaur remnants of sea creatures in Kansas, and they're like, really? We used to have a beach? Yeah, it's been a while, but.
Well, our next show is going to be at the New York City Comedy Club, starring Chris Kuehl, Dr. Chris Kuehl. Well, I think you may have left us and our audience really with more questions than answers.
Then I've done my job.
Yeah, I got that. And everything you said today will probably, as you say in the past, unless things change next month.
Exactly. We in the economics profession are very proud of the fact that we can accurately predict the past. And the future, that's a whole nother discussion.
Right, got it. Well, that's terrific. Do you have any parting thoughts and comments for us?
I think the only parting comment is that however bad you think something is going to be, it often does not turn out to be as bad as thought. For example, we've been looking at global trade numbers, and everyone thought that global trade was going to completely collapse because of last year. Now that we've had a chance to look at the actual numbers, it's down 5.3%. It hardly changed at all. So I guess my advice to people is that we in the profession tend to present the worst case scenario so that people can prepare for the worst, and at the same time trying to remind them that yes, you need to have contingencies if it gets this bad, but it's unlikely to. And it's kind of like the way we live our lives. I mean, we have everything we need to protect against various catastrophes, but for the most part, they don't happen. But when they do happen, you're glad you have a plan.
And you have somebody to blame.
Absolutely. Well, that's part of the plan. That's part of the plan. That's part of the plan. You know, I mean, there's got to be got to be accountability anywhere but yourself. That's the way it goes.
No question. Chris, thank you for your humorous perspective. Tim?
We always appreciate Chris Kuehl joining us on the show, and he does add some levity to some serious subjects, which is a relief for all of the seriousness around us after 2020, which was way too much. So thanks again, Chris, for joining us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Stay safe and stay healthy.
And we will be back with Chris next month. And as always, we encourage you to go to mfgtalkradio.com to catch this show, or jacketmediaco.com to find links to all of our other shows, or you can find us on C-Suite TV or the C-Suite Radio Podcast Network, along with your favorite platform for listening to podcasts or viewing videos. Yes, we're also on YouTube. Thanks again for being with us on Manufacturing Talk Radio.
Bye all.